Hey everyone, ready for a deep dive? We're going to be talking about something pretty interesting today.
Oh yeah, what's that?
Well, we're going to get into the ideas of replacement and change within the Quran.
I like it.
And, I think it's going to challenge some of those traditional interpretations we've all heard about.
Yeah, I bet.
So, to do that, we're going to be going deep into some excerpts from this Arabic text by Dr. Khaled Waleed. Have you heard of him?
Yeah, he takes this really unique approach, doesn't he?
Right. He emphasizes direct engagement with the Quranic text itself.
Yeah, and he doesn't shy away from pushing back against centuries of interpretation.
Exactly. He actually argues that a lot of those traditional interpretations have led us away from the true meaning of the Quran.
Yeah. He's really passionate about getting people to engage with the Quran, on a deeper level, more critical.
He even calls some of these traditional interpretations counterfeit religion.
Wow. Yeah, strong words.
Yeah. So today we're going to focus on replacement first. In Arabic, that's al-tabdil. So what's the core of Dr. Waleed's argument there?
Well, he says that replacement is all about substituting something new, right?
Right.
But the key is that the foundation, the core function, stays intact.
Give me an example.
Okay, so think about like renovating a house. You might want to, update that kitchen, that bathroom. But the structure of the house itself...
It's not going anywhere.
Exactly.
So it's more like a renewal then, not a complete wipe.
Exactly, a renewal. And that's what he sees, a renewal for the better. Always for the better.
So how does that thinking play out in the Quran?
Well, he points to verse 2.106. It says, whatever sign we reinstate, nansakh, or cause to be obfuscated, we bring a better one or similar to it.
Right. Okay, so that's interesting.
It's not about erasing verses. It's about bringing back a truth in a way that we can understand now.
I like that.
Bringing it back.
Okay, so then he brings up this idea of replacement being connected to forgetfulness. And this is where I got a little lost, to be honest. What's he getting at there?
This is where it gets really interesting because this is where he challenges that traditional view of abrogation,
right? Which
is the idea that some verses in the Quran cancel out earlier ones. He's saying, no, the Quran doesn't actually support that view.
Instead.
He's suggesting that it's more about forgetting and then being reminded of a truth, and maybe with a fresh perspective this time, or even a deeper understanding.
Okay. I'm trying to wrap my head around this forgetting part. So is he suggesting that Allah forgets things?
No. Not at all. It's more about recognizing our human limitations in understanding and remembering.
Okay.
So the Quran might use the language of forgetting, to describe how we as humans can sometimes lose sight of certain truths. And then these truths are brought back to us.
Back to us.
But maybe in a new light.
Okay. So if the Quran is meant to be a guide for all time, how does this idea of replacement work?
Right. It's a good question.
Like, how can something be unchanging yet also be replaced?
Yeah. I think what Dr. Waleed would say is that the core message, the fundamental truths, those are constant. But what might change is the way that those truths are presented, Like
updated.
Yeah. Maybe to address new challenges, to meet people where they're at a particular time in history.
Okay. To make it more accessible.
Exactly. Accessible. To make the message relevant and accessible without compromising the essence.
Okay. I think I'm starting to get the idea of replacement now.
Okay, good.
As Dr. Waleed sees it.
Yeah.
So how did he contrast this with the idea of change?
So for change, he uses the Arabic word al-tagir.
Okay.
And he defines it as a much more fundamental alteration. It's not just updating the form, it's a shift in the very essence.
And he specifically links this idea of change to human actions, right?
Absolutely. He emphasizes that Allah's creation is perfect and doesn't require change. Change, he argues, is primarily something that we undergo as humans.
It reminds me of that verse in the Quran 13.11. Indeed, Allah will not change the condition of a people until they change what is in themselves. So it's all about that inner transformation.
Inner transformation, yes.
It's not about waiting for a miracle or anything. Real change starts with you.
Exactly.
It starts with you. What inner changes are you being called to make?
Ooh, that's a good one.
Yeah.
And that verse really gets to the heart of what he's highlighting.
Right.
The power of human free will, our capacity to choose a different path.
I like that a lot.
Yeah.
He also uses another really powerful verse to illustrate a very different kind of change. like the kind that leads to a complete break from the truth.
Oh, yeah. What's that one?
It's verse 3.83. It says, "And whoever desires a religion other than Islam, submission to the will of God, it will never be accepted of him, and he in the hereafter will be among the losers."
Wow. Yeah, it's a stark warning.
It is.
In this case, change means a complete departure from those core principles. A change that represents a loss, not a gain.
So it's a reminder to be mindful of the path we choose and where it might lead us.
You got it.
So thinking about both the positive and negative aspects of change, what does this mean for us in our own lives?
Ooh, that's a good question. What does it mean? I think what Dr. Waleed is saying is that, we're constantly faced with choices.
Every day.
And these choices can lead us closer to the truth or further away from it.
Yeah. Makes you think. What kind of changes are you facing in your own life?
Ooh, I like that.
Yeah.
I like that a lot. He's challenging us to think more deeply about what we believe and why.
Right. It's not enough to just accept, interpretations that we've inherited without ever questioning them.
Question them. Why do you believe that? Why?
Right. Now, Dr. Waleed really goes on to dismantle the traditional understanding of abrogation.
He does not hold back.
He calls those who promote the idea that God's words can be abrogated foolish.
Wow.
And he even says they are associating partners with Allah and fabricating lies against him.
Right.
It's powerful stuff.
It is. So he's saying that the Quran never suggests that God's words can be erased or canceled out.
Never.
Instead, he points to the concept of recalling or restoring a forgotten verse.
Yes. Subtle but really important distinction there.
It is. So he's saying that if we accept the idea that God's words can be abrogated, then we're saying that God is capable of making mistakes or changing his mind.
Exactly. And for him, that's unacceptable.
Unacceptable.
He argues for a much higher view of divine revelation.
So really what he's saying is that if we truly believe that the Quran is the word of God, then we have to really wrestle with what that belief means.
I like that.
Okay. So we've talked about replacement, we've talked about change, and we've touched on his view of abrogation. Where does he go from there?
Well, all of this leads him to another fascinating concept, Baqa al-Quds, which he uses as a really powerful metaphor.
Baqa al-Quds, that's Jerusalem, right?
Yes, Jerusalem.
Yeah.
And for Dr. Waleed, Jerusalem is a key symbol.
That represents the unchanging nature of Allah's plan. He contrasts this fixed symbol with the prophets, the verses, as he calls them, who occupy it.
So you have this fixed location.
Jerusalem.
But the verses, the prophets, are constantly changing.
You got it. And this metaphor perfectly illustrates his point. The essence of Allah's message.
Constant.
But the way that it's delivered, the prophets who convey it.
It might vary.
Might vary, depending on the context and the needs of the people.
So it's kind of like that house renovation analogy.
Yeah. The structure remains the same.
But you might want to update or improve certain elements.
Yeah.
I like that.
How does that resonate with you?
It definitely makes me rethink how my own understanding of faith and tradition kind of fit into all of this.
Yeah.
This is a lot to unpack.
It is. And we've only just scratched the surface.
I know. I can't wait for the next part.
Yeah. Next time we'll explore how Dr. Waleed applies these ideas to specific examples in the Quran.
Ooh, that'll be good.
And we'll tackle some of the more controversial aspects of his arguments.
Can't wait. This is definitely a deep dive. See you in part 2.
Welcome back, everyone. So we are in the thick of it now, exploring Dr. Khaled Waleed's take on replacement and change in the Quran.
Yes.
Last time we kind of laid a groundwork, defining those terms as he sees them.
What did?
Now I'm ready to see how he actually applies them to specific examples.
Yes. He gets into the nitty-gritty, dissecting verses and phrases, analyzing structure, meaning...
Right. So it's not just theoretical.
Not at all.
Okay, so one example that really stood out to me was his analysis of Pharaoh's fear in verse 40.26. Do you remember that one?
Yeah.
Pharaoh says, "Let me kill Moses and let him call upon his Lord. Indeed, I fear that he will alter your religion or that he will cause corruption in the land."
Right.
But Dr. Waleed uses this verse to talk about replacement, not change. And I have to admit that confused me a little bit. Can you help me understand why? Of course. Dr. Waleed points out that Pharaoh isn't really afraid of Moses changing the essence of their religion. What Pharaoh fears is Moses replacing his whole power structure with a new one, one based on submission to Allah. It's like a total overhaul of who holds authority, not just some minor tweaks.
So Pharaoh was basically terrified that his whole system of control is going to get swept away.
Yeah.
And replaced with something totally different.
Exactly. And that something else is what Dr. Waleed understands as the true religion.
Which is?
Islam.
Right, okay.
Surrendering to God's will, you know, not to the whims of a tyrannical ruler.
Right, like Pharaoh. Yeah, that's a fascinating way to look at that verse.
It is.
You start to see how the age-old struggle between truth and falsehood is really a struggle for power.
Oh, absolutely. It goes back to Dr. Waleed's bigger argument about divine stability versus human, fallibility.
Right.
True power, he says, rests with Allah.
Not with any human leader.
Exactly. Where do you place your trust and authority? Think about it.
Okay. Let's shift gears a little bit and look at how Dr. Waleed uses verse 13.11 to illustrate the concept of change, the human kind of change.
Yes.
Indeed, Allah will not change the condition of a people until they change what is in themselves.
It's all about inner transformation.
It is. It's a powerful reminder that you can't just wait around for things to get better.
You can't.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Real change starts with us, with what's going on inside.
He's emphasizing our own agency as human beings.
Right.
We're not just passive bystanders. We can make choices.
We can. Choices that shape our destiny.
Exactly. But it all starts with that internal shift.
And I guess this is where the idea of free will comes in, right?
Yeah.
We have the choice to cling to our old ways or to embrace change and try to create something better. What do you think about that? Knowing that we have that choice.
It's a responsibility.
It is.
But it's also an incredible opportunity. Dr. Waleed is saying that change can lead to progress, but it can also lead to decline.
Yeah, that's right.
It's up to us to choose which path to walk.
So it's like we're standing at a crossroads.
We are having to decide which direction to go.
I like that a lot.
Yeah.
And that decision has consequences, not just for ourselves, but for others as well.
Big time.
So speaking of challenging choices, we have to talk about his critique of the traditional interpretations of abrogation.
Okay, let's do it.
This is where his passion for the Quran and its divine stability really shine through.
I agree. He's not afraid to call out what he sees as flawed interpretations.
Right.
Uses strong language, too.
He does.
He accuses those who promote this idea of abrogation, of associating partners with Allah, and even fabricating lies against him.
It's heavy stuff.
It is.
But you can sense how deeply he cares about this. He sees these interpretations as distortions. Of the Quran's true meaning.
Right, and he's saying that if we accept this idea that God's words can be abrogated, then we're basically saying that God can change his mind.
Right.
And for him, that's a big problem.
It is.
He argues for a much, loftier view of divine revelation.
It makes you think about the nature of divine revelation and the authority of the Quran.
Yeah.
If God's words can be changed or canceled out, then how can we trust their reliability?
Good question.
How can we be sure that they'll always be there for us?
Exactly. And that's what his work forces us to do, to grapple with those questions.
Now, another example he uses to illustrate the difference between replacement and change is the story of the children of Israel.
Oh, yeah.
In verses 2.211 and 25.70.
Okay.
He points out that even though they were given clear signs, blessings,
right,
they chose to alter God's favor to fit their own desires.
Yeah, they twisted it.
They did. So it's a warning about human arrogance and ingratitude.
It is.
He's arguing that the children of Israel had it all. Blessings galore. But they let their doubts and selfish desires lead them astray.
Yeah, they did.
It makes you wonder, what blessings do we take for granted?
Ooh, that's a good question.
Right.
Yeah. What do we distort?
It's a good question for all of us to ask.
Yeah.
It reminds us that we have a responsibility to be grateful for what we have.
Yeah.
And to use it wisely.
You got it. He's highlighting the potential for corruption, that exists within each of us. We have the capacity for great good, but also for great harm.
That's true.
It's a choice. It's a choice that we make every day.
Every day. And those choices have consequences.
Absolutely.
Not just for us, but for generations to come.
Right. I love how he leaves these theological insights with historical examples.
Me too.
It's intellectually stimulating and spiritually challenging. At the same
making me rethink a lot of my own assumptions about the Quran.
That's what's so great about his work. He's not giving us easy answers. He's making us ask deeper questions.
All right.
And those questions lead to growth.
Okay. Before we wrap up part 2, let's go back to that idea of Baka al-Quds,
Yeah.
Jerusalem, as this powerful metaphor for the unchanging nature of God's plan. He uses this to highlight the tension between the stability of divine revelation and how human interpretation can be so different.
You got it. Remember that analogy of the classic song?
Right.
The melody, that core message, stays the same. But different artists might interpret it in their own way.
Okay, yeah. I remember that.
So think of Baka al-Quds, Jerusalem, as representing that eternal truth, while the prophets who occupy it, the verses, are like those different interpretations.
Okay, so we have this constant, this fixed point,
Baka al-Quds.
which is like the core of the Quran.
Right. And then you have all those different interpretations, the verses, which are shaped by, so many things. Historical context, human understanding, even cultural biases.
It seems like he's saying that we need to be able to discern between the two.
Yes.
To recognize those core truths while also being open to new interpretations that might come along.
Exactly. It's a dynamic way of thinking, an evolving way of engaging with the Quran, rooted in tradition, yes, but also welcoming growth.
Okay, so let's dive right in.
Okay.
So Dr. Waleed, he starts by talking about this idea of nask,
Okay.
which is traditionally interpreted as abrogation.
Right.
And he seems to be suggesting that this concept has been misunderstood and misapplied.
Yeah, the traditional interpretation of nask implies that some verses in the Quran have been canceled out or superseded by later verses. But Dr. Waleed, he argues that this isn't really an accurate reflection of what the Quran itself says.
So he's not saying that verses are completely erased.
Exactly. He's calling for a more nuanced understanding of nask. He suggests that it's more of a replacement or even restoring a forgotten verse.
Okay.
Emphasizing the unchanging nature of Allah's words.
So instead of thinking about it as one verse being completely erased by another, it's more like an evolution or refinement of the message.
That's a great way to put it, yeah.
Okay.
It's about understanding that the Quran was revealed over time, right? In response to specific events, circumstances.
Yeah.
And while that core message remains constant, the way that it's expressed or the specific instructions given, those might evolve as the situation changes.
Okay, I'm starting to see where he's going with this. So how does he define replacement in this context?
He defines it as substituting something new,
Okay.
but preserving that foundational function. So it's about renewal within stability.
Okay.
That core essence remains the same, but the outward form might be updated, adapted.
I'm thinking of it like renovating a house, You change the layout, update the decor, modernize the appliances, but the fundamental purpose of the house, to provide shelter, a place to live, it stays the same.
That's a perfect analogy.
Yeah.
Dr. Waleed actually uses a Quranic example to illustrate this concept.
Okay.
He cites verse 2.106.
Right.
Whatever sign we reinstate, nansak ayah, or cause to be obfuscated, we bring a better one or similar to it.
So this verse is saying that if a sign or a verse has been forgotten or obscured, it can be replaced with a better or similar one.
Exactly.
So it's not about erasing the previous verse, but restoring and renewing the message.
Exactly. It's about ensuring that that guidance remains relevant, accessible.
Yeah.
Even as circumstances change, time passes.
That makes sense. Okay. So replacement is about preserving the core essence.
Yes.
While adapting the form to fit new contexts.
Right.
But what about change? How does he define change?
He defines change as a complete transformation.
Okay.
In function or content. It's a more fundamental shift.
Okay.
A departure from the original purpose or essence.
So if replacement is like renovating a house, change would be like demolishing the house and building something totally different.
That's a good way to visualize it, yeah.
Okay.
And Dr. Waleed argues that this kind of radical transformation applies mainly to human actions and choices, not to Allah's creation.
Because Allah's creation is perfect, doesn't require alteration. But humans, with our free will, we're constantly making choices that shape our reality, for better or for worse.
Exactly. And he uses a Quranic verse to highlight this. He cites 13.11.
Okay.
Indeed, Allah will not change the condition of a people until they change what is in themselves.
So this verse is saying that true change starts within individuals.
Yes.
We have the power to transform our lives, but it's up to us to make those choices.
Right.
And Allah's support and guidance are always there, but we have to take that first step.
Precisely. It's about recognizing our agency
Yeah.
our ability to shape our destiny, and understanding that our choices have consequences, both for ourselves and for those around us.
Okay, so we've got replacement, which is about renewal within a stable framework.
Yes.
And change, which is about fundamental transformation, usually related to human actions.
Right, and he emphasizes this contrast throughout the text,
Okay.
highlighting the stability of the divine. Allah's words are unchanging, reflecting his perfect knowledge and wisdom versus the variability of the human.
It's a powerful reminder that even as the world around us is constantly changing,
Yes.
we can find a sense of grounding and stability in those eternal truths of the Quran.
Absolutely. And this leads us to his critique of traditional interpretations
Okay.
that have distorted these Quranic concepts of replacement and change, especially the idea of abrogation. He's particularly critical of interpretations that suggest that Allah's words can be erased or canceled out.
Because that would imply imperfection.
Exactly.
Or a change of mind on the part of Allah.
Right.
Which contradicts, the Islamic belief in his absolute perfection and wisdom.
Exactly. And he argues that these kinds of interpretations are often based on a misunderstanding of the historical context of the Quran.
Okay.
Or on attempts to impose external ideas onto the text.
So he's advocating for a more careful and contextualized reading of the Quran.
That's right.
One that takes into account the circumstances of its revelation.
Yes.
And the overall message it conveys.
Exactly. He's calling for a return to that pure Quranic text as the ultimate source of guidance. And he's encouraging readers to be critical of interpretations that don't align with the Quran's core message.
Okay, so we've laid the groundwork for understanding his approach to replacement and change.
Yes.
Now, I'm really curious to see how he applies these concepts to specific verses in the Quran.
Me too.
You mentioned that he analyzes several key examples.
Yes, he does.
Okay.
And his analysis they're really thought-provoking.
Okay.
He looks at verses that deal with a range of topics, from warfare to social interactions.
Wow.
And he shows how these concepts of replacement and change can help us to understand these verses in a new light.
I'm ready to dive into those examples.
Okay, let's do it.
Let's start with the verses from Surah Al-Anfal, verses 65 and 66,
Okay.
dealing with the Battle of the Confederates.
Those are fascinating because they offer a strategic perspective on defense and illustrate how replacement plays out in a military context.
This is where it gets really interesting. Tell me more.
Okay, so these verses, they provide specific instructions on the number of soldiers that you actually need for defense against a larger enemy force.
Okay.
And Dr. Waleed points out that this initial plan, as outlined in these verses, was replaced due to a change in circumstances.
Interesting.
Specifically, the betrayal of some of the defenders.
So it wasn't the verses themselves that were replaced, but rather the strategies they outlined.
Precisely.
Okay, and what does this betrayal have to do with replacement?
Well, the betrayal, which is actually detailed in verses 922 of Surah Al-Ahzab, it forced a change in the defensive strategy. These verses, they describe how some individuals who had pledged allegiance to the believers, they secretly collaborated with the enemy.
Wow.
And this weakened the defenses from within.
That's a serious breach of trust.
It is.
It sounds like this betrayal directly impacted the believer's ability to defend themselves.
Exactly. That initial plan was based on the assumption of loyalty among all the defenders.
Right.
But this act of treachery, it made that plan obsolete. So a new approach was needed, one that accounted for this new reality of betrayal.
So in this case, replacement wasn't about a change in Allah's command,
Right.
but rather a necessary adaptation to a changing battlefield.
That's right. The principle of defending the community, it remained constant, but the tactics had to be adjusted to fit the evolving situation.
Makes sense.
And Dr. Waleed highlights how this example, it demonstrates that dynamic nature of replacement, showcasing how it responds to changing circumstances while still upholding those core principles of the Quran.
I see how this example really brings replacement to life, It's not about erasing or contradicting previous commands, but about building upon them in a way that responds to new challenges.
Exactly. And this underscores the importance of understanding that historical context surrounding the races. We can't just read them in isolation.
Right.
We need to consider the events and situations that led to their revelation.
It sounds like he's encouraging us to think like historians.
He is.
When studying the Quran.
Yes.
We need to piece together the historical puzzle to fully grasp the meaning of the verses.
Absolutely. And he emphasizes that the Quran is a living document, right?
Right.
Revealed in stages and in response to real-world events.
Yeah.
Understanding those events, it can enrich our understanding of the text immeasurably.
This is making me rethink my own approach to studying the Quran.
Really?
Yeah, I've always focused on the literal meanings of the words, but now I'm realizing how much richer my understanding could be if I delve deeper into the historical context.
That's a wonderful realization.
Yeah.
I think that's precisely Dr. Waleed's intention
Okay.
to encourage a more critical and engaged approach to studying the Quran.
Okay, so we've covered that example from Surah Al-Anfal.
Yes.
Seen how it relates to replacement. You mentioned that Dr. Waleed also analyzes verses 922 from Surah Al-Asab. And those verses, they describe the Battle of the Confederates in more detail.
They do, and they offer some fascinating insights into change.
Okay.
As Dr. Waleed presents it. He focuses on the psychological dimension of change, arguing that the betrayal of some individuals, it reflected a deeper shift within their hearts.
So it's not just about their outward actions,
No.
but about a fundamental transformation in their inner state.
Precisely. Remember those individuals who opened the tunnels and collaborated with the enemy?
Yeah.
He highlights the verses that describe their hypocrisy
Okay.
and cowardice. They claim to be believers, but their actions revealed a different reality.
They prioritize their own safety and comfort over the well-being of the community,
Yes.
even making excuses to justify their betrayal.
Exactly. And Dr. Waleed points out that those excuses, they masked their lack of genuine faith
Yeah.
and their willingness to compromise their principles for personal gain.
So their actions were a symptom of a deeper change that had already occurred within them. They had drifted away from those values and principles of Islam.
That's right. And this example serves as a powerful reminder that true faith, it goes beyond mere words or rituals. It requires aligning our actions with our beliefs, even when it's difficult or inconvenient.
It's a potent reminder that we're all susceptible to this kind of negative change.
We are.
Where our hearts can stray from what we know is right. These verses, they seem to be urging us to be vigilant in guarding our hearts
Yes.
and intentions.
Absolutely. These verses illustrate how change can represent a negative transformation, a deviation from the straight path. Dr. Waleed seems to be encouraging us to recognize those signs of such change within ourselves and our communities, and urging us to challenge actions that go against Islamic values.
Because silence can be interpreted as acceptance or complicity.
It can.
We have a responsibility to speak up when we see principles being compromised.
Yes, speaking truth to power, even when uncomfortable, it's crucial for upholding those Islamic values.
These verses from Surah Al-Ahzab really offer a profound reflection
They do.
on the nature of change. His analysis has shed light on how our inner state can manifest in our actions,
Yes,
and the importance of consistently aligning ourselves with Islamic principles.
indeed. And this brings us to another set of verses that Dr. Waleed analyzes.
Okay.
Verses 190, 191 from Surah Al-Baqarah.
Okay.
These verses are often cited in discussions about warfare in Islam.
Oh, I can only imagine
Right.
the debates surrounding those verses.
Yeah, they've been subject to various interpretations.
Yeah.
It's a sensitive topic.
Very sensitive.
Yes.
I'm really curious to hear Dr. Waleed's take on them.
Okay, well, his interpretation is quite thought-provoking.
Okay.
He argues that the command to kill in these verses, it shouldn't always be taken literally.
That's a very nuanced perspective,
It is.
especially considering the common interpretations of these verses.
Right.
What leads him to this conclusion?
Well, he grounds his argument in the context of these verses,
Well-
which pertain to defending the sacred precinct from aggression.
Cool.
He argues that the primary objective in this situation is protecting the sanctity of the holy site
Right.
and repelling the attackers,
Okay.
not necessarily taking their lives.
So he's emphasizing the defensive nature of the command,
Yes.
suggesting that lethal force should only be a last resort.
Exactly. The verses clearly state that fighting is permissible only in response to aggression,
Okay.
not for initiating violence or seeking dominance.
Right.
It's about protecting oneself and one's community from harm.
That makes sense. It aligns with the broader Islamic principles of peace,
It does.
justice, self-defense.
Yes, it's about restoring peace and preventing further harm,
Right.
not about seeking revenge or inflicting unnecessary suffering.
Dr. Waleed challenges that simplistic notion that Islam condones violence,
He does.
or that these verses provide a blanket justification for warfare.
Exactly.
His interpretation advocates for a more nuanced understanding, That considers the context, intent, and proportionality of force.
Right. He seems to be calling for a more ethical and measured approach to conflict,
Yeah.
prioritizing the preservation of life whenever possible.
It's a powerful reminder that even in situations of conflict, our actions should be guided by those principles of justice and compassion.
Yes. And he connects this back to the concepts of replacement and change.
Okay.
While the specific strategies and tactics used in warfare might need to be replaced or adapted as circumstances evolve, the underlying principles, justice, self-defense, and the protection of innocent lives,
Right.
those should always remain constant.
That's an insightful takeaway.
It is.
It's about recognizing the dynamic nature of conflict
Yeah.
and the need to adapt our responses while remaining grounded in those unchanging principles of Islam. His analysis is making me rethink the ethical dimensions of conflict in a much deeper way.
It's certainly a challenging but crucial conversation.
It is.
Dr. Waleed, he reminds us that we shouldn't rely on superficial interpretations of the Quran.
Especially when dealing with complex issues like warfare.
Yeah.
We need to engage critically with the text, consider the historical context, and strive to align our understanding with those broader principles of Islam.
Okay. I need a moment to absorb all of this.
Take your time.
It's a lot to process, but his analysis has definitely deepened my understanding.
Good.
He's opened my eyes to the complexity of these verses and the importance of approaching them with humility and a genuine desire to learn.
Yes.
What else does he discuss in the text?
Well, he emphasizes the importance of returning to the pure Quranic text as the ultimate source of guidance.
Okay.
He's critical of interpretations that rely heavily on external sources
Okay.
or introduce concepts not explicitly supported by the Quran itself.
So he advocates for a more direct and unmediated engagement with the Quran.
Yes.
Trusting in its clarity and completeness.
Exactly. He suggests we don't need to rely on those elaborate interpretations or external traditions to understand its message,
Right. He believes the Quran is clear and comprehensive in its guidance.
This seems to align with his emphasis on the stability of the divine and the variability of the human.
Right.
If Allah's words are perfect and unchanging,
Yes.
then prioritizing those words over human interpretations, no matter how well-intentioned they are, makes sense.
It does.
It sounds like he's encouraging us to cultivate a personal relationship with the Quran,
Yes.
allowing its words to nourish our hearts and guide our actions directly.
That's precisely it.
Okay.
He believes the Quran can speak to us directly, regardless of our background or level of knowledge.
Yeah.
It's about fostering that personal connection and allowing the Quran to guide us on our individual journeys.
This resonates deeply with me.
Really?
Yeah, I've often felt intimidated by the idea of interpreting the Quran on my own.
I see.
But his approach is empowering.
Yeah.
It makes me feel more confident in engaging with the text directly and trusting my understanding.
That's wonderful to hear. That's what he seems to be aiming for.
Well,
encouraging readers to find their own connection with the Quran, to discover its meaning for themselves. It's a journey of personal growth and discovery.
I'm feeling inspired.
Good.
I'm ready to revisit some of these verses with a fresh perspective, and I want to engage with the Quran more directly,
Yes.
allowing its words to speak to me on a personal level.
That's fantastic. Remember, it's a journey, not a destination.
Right.
The Quran is a source of endless learning and inspiration. You can always revisit it and gain new insights.
Speaking of inspiration, I'm reminded of another powerful image that he uses in the text.
Oh, yeah.
He talks about the significance of Baka al-Quds,
Yes.
Jerusalem, as a symbol of divine stability.
Yes. That's a remarkable passage.
It is.
He uses Jerusalem to illustrate the contrast between the unchanging nature of Allah's plan and the ever-changing course of human history.
Yeah, he refers to Jerusalem as a fixed word of Allah, a constant element in his divine plan.
Yes.
It's an image that evokes a sense of enduring permanence amidst the flux of history.
Exactly. He juxtaposes this fixed word with the verses representing the prophets who've occupied Jerusalem throughout history.
Right.
These prophets, these verses have come and gone,
Yeah.
but the house itself, the city of Jerusalem, remains a constant.
It's like saying the essence of the message, the divine truth represented by Jerusalem, is unchanging.
Right.
But the way that truth is revealed and lived out, those verses embodied by the prophets can take many forms over time.
That's a beautiful way to put it.
Yeah.
It ties in perfectly with the concept of replacement. Just as the prophets who occupied Jerusalem were replaced over time, The specific expressions of Islam have also evolved.
But the core message, the essence of Islam, remains constant.
Yes.
Just like the city of Jerusalem itself. It's a reassuring thought that even amidst constant change, there's an underlying foundation of unyielding truth.
Absolutely. It's a profound reminder that even as the world changes around us, Allah's plan remains steadfast, unfolding according to His will.
It encourages us to find our place within that plan, to align our lives with those eternal truths,
Yes.
and to trust that even when things feel chaotic, Allah's plan is always unfolding perfectly.
It's a powerful message of hope and reassurance.
It is.
It reminds us that amidst the turbulence of history and our own lives, we can always find solace in the unchanging truth of Allah's guidance.
This deep dive has been an incredible journey of discovery.
It has.
His analysis has pushed me to think critically about my understanding of the Quran and to find new meaning in its verses.
It's been a pleasure exploring these concepts with you.
Likewise, I feel like we've only just scratched the surface.
I think so too.
There's always more to uncover in the Quran. Okay, so we've talked a lot about Dr. Waleed's analysis of replacement and change, especially in those verses about the Battle of the Confederates, and even how the word kill can have a deeper meaning depending on the context. But I think I'm still trying to wrap my head around this idea that the Quran is unchanging. When we know the world around us, even ourselves, we're always changing, always in flux.
That's a question a lot of people have.
It's a good one, right?
Yeah.
It's almost like trying to hold on to something solid when you're standing in a rushing river.
It is, and Dr. Waleed, he doesn't shy away from that tension.
Well.
No, he actually sees it as a source of strength.
Interesting.
He believes that the unchanging nature of Allah's words, that provides an anchor, a stable anchor in a world that's constantly shifting.
So it's not about trying to force the Quran to fit into our limited, always changing understanding.
Exactly. It's about allowing the Quran to shape your understanding.
Okay.
It's about recognizing that its wisdom, it transcends time and circumstance, and that's why he emphasizes returning to that original text,
Right.
stripping away layers of interpretation that might have kind of built up over time.
Yeah, obscured that core message.
Exactly.
I keep thinking back to that powerful image of Jerusalem, Baqa al-Quds.
It is powerful.
He calls it a fixed point in Allah's plan.
Yeah, this house that stays the same even as the verses change, you know?
Right. Those prophets who came and went throughout history.
Exactly.
It really captures what he's saying, doesn't it?
It does, that divine truth.
Yeah.
That essence of the message.
Unchanging.
Unchanging, yeah.
But how that truth is revealed and lived out, those specific forms it takes, those can evolve.
And that's where replacement comes in.
Yeah.
It's not about erasing or contradicting what came before, but building on it, refining it.
Adapting it to new situations.
Right. But always preserving those core principles.
Just like those verses we talked about, the Battle of the Confederates.
Exactly.
The strategies had to change because things happened that no one expected.
Right.
But the idea of defending the community, upholding justice, that stayed the same.
It did. It reminds us that the Quran's guidance, it's both timeless and adaptable.
I think that's what's so empowering about what Dr. Waleed is saying. He's giving us the tools to think for ourselves.
He is.
To connect with the Quran's message on a deeper level.
Encouraging us to go back to that source.
Yeah.
Understand the historical context. And use our own reason guided by faith to figure out the true meaning.
So it's not about just blindly following what other people say it means.
No, it's about owning our understanding
Yeah.
of the Quran and letting that guide us on our own journeys.
But that can be hard.
It can. It takes effort.
Yeah.
Study, reflection.
But the rewards are worth it.
They are. It deepens your relationship with the Quran. It allows its wisdom to illuminate your life.
It's about more than just reading words.
It is.
It's about letting the Quran shape how you see the world, how you see yourself, your relationship with Allah.
This deep dive has been a step on that path for us.
I think so.
And we hope it's been for you too. But it's a lifelong journey
It is.
of learning and discovery.
And the Quran is an endless source of wisdom and guidance, like Dr. Waleed says.
It is. It's a gift that keeps on giving.
So keep exploring, keep asking those questions, and keep allowing the Quran to speak to your heart.
Beautifully said.
And to our listeners, we really hope this deep dive has made you curious and even inspired you to explore the Quran more on your own.
May Allah guide us all on this path of knowledge and understanding.
Until next time, keep diving deep.